Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Very good to be here. After 8 months in Chicago. Yeah. So thank you, Rabbi Geffen. It's amazing to be here. And an amazing service. Thank you, really. I loved it. So my name is Yinam Cohen. I'm the Consul General of Israel to the Midwest. I've been here since last summer, since last August. I survived the first winter in Chicago, so I think I can do everything right now. Just looking forward for the summer to begin. And I'm a neighbor too. I live in Highland Park, so I'm very happy to be here. As Rabbi Geffen mentioned, this is a very special week for us. For us in Israel, I think for the Jews around the world, since we commemorate 3 days that are basically telling the story of the people of Israel, I think, of the Jewish people. First, just a week ago, we remembered Yom HaShoah. We commemorated the most terrible tragedy in the history of the Jewish people, probably. Something that is, I think, for many of us, it's also a family story. The case of my family, my wife's family is definitely the case. Just this week, right before Yom HaAtzmaut, we commemorated Yom HaZikaron, when we remembered the 28,000 people in Israel who died either in the battlefield or in terror attacks. And then, just yesterday, Yom HaAtzmaut, which was a very happy day for us. You know, I spoke to many Jewish schools yesterday around Chicagoland about Yom HaAtzmaut, and I told them that you know, every country's national day is very happy. The 4th of July is a very happy day. But for those of you who happen to spend Yom HaAtzmaut in Israel, you know that the celebrations are strong and deep and very meaningful. And I think that's because first, we remember the high price we had to pay to get this independence, to get this freedom. And we also remember, connecting to Yom HaShoah, what happened when we didn't have our own country, our own state. So this is something really to celebrate. And we celebrated. But at the same time, unfortunately, we're not totally safe in our country, even though we want to. Terror attacks have continued, even during Yom HaAtzmaut itself. Just yesterday, unfortunately, in a very brutal and sick way, 3 Israelis were murdered. They joined altogether almost 20 people, Jews and Arabs, women, men, civils, policemen, who were killed by terrorists in the recent weeks. I really hope that's the last one, but I'm not sure. It was terror attacks that were incited by the radical forces that are still there in the Middle East. With a big inspiration, unfortunately, I hate to speak about politics in synagogue, but you know, that's our life. Unfortunately, inspired by Iran, a country that we are very much concerned of right now, not just because the terror spreads around the Middle East, but also because their ambitions of nuclear weapons are still there. And we follow very closely the negotiations that are being held now between the United States, Russia, China, Germany, Britain, the United Kingdom, France, and Iran, with the hope that any agreement that is reached, Israel is not against an agreement with Iran. We just hope that any agreement that is reached will be strong enough and long enough to guarantee that their nuclear ambitions are not fulfilled. But let's talk about the good things. You know, this is less covered or heard of, but the recent 2 weeks in the Middle East were actually very positive in general terms. You know, I had the privilege before I arrived to Chicago to work as policy advisor to the previous foreign minister, Mr. Gabi Ashkenazi. And even though it was during the pandemic, and it's very hard to do diplomacy during the pandemic, because it's all about meeting people, I think we had 2 amazing opportunities, historic opportunities, and for me personally, to be part of. First, That was the easy thing. We were working on, not working, we were accompanying the transition here in the United States and establishing the new relations, the relations with the new Biden administration. It was very intensive. It was very satisfying, I would say, because really, I mean, the dialogue right now between the American administration and the Israeli government are really close and intimate. We don't agree necessarily on everything. That's all right. There are sometimes nuances, but the good thing is that right now they're discussed in closed room as friends do. I don't know if you heard, but in the coming weeks, President Biden is going to visit for the first time in Israel. His first visit as a president, not his first visit, of course. He's a great friend of Israel. He's been there many times, and we're really looking forward to that. And the second thing, and I have to say, even more exciting that I did during my period in Israel, was actually being part of establishing the new peace agreements that were signed less than 2 years ago with 3 new Arab countries. And this is something big. This is something really that changed the face of the Middle East. I'm trying not to be very dramatic, but it is a dramatic change. I'm talking about the peace agreement, the Abraham Accords with Morocco, with Bahrain, and with the United Arab Emirates. I can tell you, we were very, very optimistic when these agreements were signed. I was personally on the first official flight from Israel to Bahrain, really to finalize. I was there for only 4 hours, really to finalize the last details of the peace agreement in the Royal Palace there. I came back, I always tell the story. Sorry, if you've heard me before, I'm sorry, I apologize. But, you know, I arrived back home at the end of the day, and asked my wife, honey, how was your day? She said, okay, and how was your day? You know, I was at the Royal Palace in Bahrain, finalizing the peace agreement. So that was a big day. I also remember I had the privilege to go with a minister to Berlin, Germany, for his first meeting with the Emirati foreign minister. And the amazing thing was, I, by the way, had previously, as Rabbi Gaffin mentioned, served as the Israeli spokesperson at the embassy in Berlin. For me, it was like returning to a place I really knew, but together with the minister, he had his first ever meeting, official meeting with the Emirati foreign minister, and they went together with the German foreign minister to visit the Holocaust Memorial in the heart of Berlin, if you know it. Now imagine that. Gabi Ashkenazi is the son of a Holocaust survivor from Bulgaria. The German foreign minister is, I don't have to say, he is a huge friend of Israel. It's a former German minister already. And an Arab minister. And you know the extent of Holocaust denial in the Arab world. So that visit sent such a strong message of reconciliation, not just between Israel as a political body, but between Arabs and Jews. And that was very, very strong. So this is something I remember. And I think that the great thing about the Abraham Accords, about the new peace in the Middle East, is that, you know, we had peace before with Jordan and Egypt for many years. It is a strategic peace, very important to Israel. But I can tell you that it was mostly peace between governments. And now what we have is peace between peoples. And that is amazing. And I told you we were very optimistic back then. Right now, after less than 2 years, I can tell you that the situation on ground has exceeded any optimistic expectations that we had back then. Imagine that, just in the first year. Israel, for the first time, was very present in the Gulf, in Expo Dubai, the international exposition. Huge Israeli pavilion, more than 2 million visitors, most of them from Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Yemen, whatever, just name it. Taking selfie, you know, in front of the Israeli flag, Israeli pavilion. We saw it all over in social media. That was amazing. We have so many direct flights between Israel and Morocco. Israelis, you know how many Moroccan Jews live in Israel. And they can now reconnect to their Moroccan heritage. And the Moroccan Arabs reconnect to their Jewish heritage because the Jewish heritage was so strong in Morocco. So now there's an amazing bond between these two heritages, if you say that. The Jewish Moroccan heritage and the Arab Moroccan heritage. It's beautiful. In Bahrain, tiny little country on the Arab Gulf, we have a defense agreement. Who would have thought 2 years ago that Israel would have a defense agreement with an Arab country, and not only that, very soon we're going to have an Israeli officer stationed in Bahrain, and that is a trilateral cooperation because he would be the liaison to the American Fifth Fleet there. So it's a celebration of peace, and it's great. Just one more little example that I love. Very soon, it was just signed. Very soon an Emirati company, private company, is going to build a solar field in Jordan. You know, they have lots of sun, even more than Israel. The Jordanians are going to sell the electricity produced there to Israel. Israel is going to use this electricity for a desalination plant, and the water that would be produced there will be sold back to Jordan. So I don't know if you remember our late president, Shimon Peres, one of the biggest Jewish visionaries. In the 1990s spoke about a new Middle East. Now it's truly a new Middle East. And this is amazing. It doesn't mean that our challenges are gone, they're still there. But I think the great thing right now is that, it used to be in the past Israel versus the Arabs, or the Jews versus the Arabs. Now it's a moderates, which is Israel and many Arab countries, versus the extremists. And this is really a new thing and which makes us very optimistic. Just last month we had the Negev Summit in Sde Boker, in the kibbutz Sde Boker, when Ben-Gurion lived his last years. All the Arab ministers from around Israel, from Egypt, from Bahrain, from Morocco, from the United Arab Emirates, together with the American Secretary of State. And this is really, again, a new Middle East. So we're very optimistic. Now, if I spoke about the paradigm shift, that it's no longer Israel and the Arabs, this is something that applies also to Israel itself. We have, for the last year, a relatively new government. It's very shaky. Political situation in Israel is complicated. We have a different system, as you know. It's not the American presidential system. We might have to adopt that in order not to have elections every year. But right now, we have a relatively new government, and it is unprecedented in the way that it is really the most diverse government in the history of Israel. This is a government that brings together, first, progressive and conservative. This is a model maybe for the United States to adopt. But also it brings together Jews and Arabs. For the first time, we have Arab parties in the Knesset, for sure. But for the first time, an Arab party that is an Islamic party is part of the ruling coalition, is part of the government. So they have the opportunity to shape Israel's future. They have the opportunity to be the decision makers. And this is a big thing, and I think it sends a very strong message to our society. Just one word, if I may, Rabbi Gaffin. I'm not sure about the time. I tend to speak a lot. All right. As I said, I've been here for 8 months now. We cover 9 states in the Midwest, so it's a very big territory, a very diverse territory, politically, socially, economically. From Michigan in the east to Nebraska and the Dakotas in the west. I try to visit all of them. I did most of them. We have different challenges in every state. But speaking about Chicago, Chicago is the heart of the Midwest. What we try to do is to really enhance our contacts and our outreach to communities that are not the usual suspects, I would say. Because if the alliance between Israel and the United States is one of a kind, I think we have to make sure that it is a very inclusive alliance, and that on the American side, as many as possible take part and work on this alliance. So we try to reach out to many communities on the west side of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, African American communities, Latino communities. We really try to engage in many civil partnerships. We're talking about partnerships. Okay, it's a mutual partnership, of course. We try to think of things that Israel excels in for many reasons, and that might be helpful here in Chicago. So you might have heard of a beautiful mental health project that has been running for some years now in Bronzeville, We are working to expand it to some Latino communities on the west side of Chicago and to other communities around the Midwest, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and other places, Detroit maybe. We are working on entrepreneurship. You know, we like to think of ourselves as a startup nation, which is probably right, but there's lots of innovation here which is just waiting to be recognized. So just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated a huge event with Latino entrepreneurs, a pitch competition, beautiful projects, really to bring together Israeli innovation and local innovation, especially among minorities, and many other projects. If you have any idea, if you have have any thought of something that we should do, just reach out to us. I would love to hear. Every idea is very much welcome. And my last sentence. For me personally, the contact, the relations with the Jewish community is very, very important. I try to visit as many congregations as I can, to speak, to reach out, to engage. And when I say engage, I really want to believe that we're trying to engage in very meaningful conversations. I know that not necessarily here, but in many places, there's a lot of love to Israel. Among some others, there are sometimes concerns or questions, and I think the engagement is very important because we want to discuss it, and it's very important. So this is my message to you. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you, Rabbi Geffen, for the invitation again, and I hope it's just the first visit of many others. So thank you, Shabbat Shalom, and Mazel Tov.